look forward to a future blog article on rosacea, but we actually looked at a lot of these conditions because we wanted to basically understand like for this specific category of generally sensitive skin and skin conditions, I want to say shared factors. And we can definitely tell you that also within rosacea, skin barrier is a really big focus as well. And because of that, we are going to go through a few guidelines and for this general realm. This sounds like we're repeating ourselves multiple times, but derms are your friends here. If you've been battling with your scenario for too long, we would say there's nothing wrong with getting an allergy test, talking to your derm, letting them assess what is really happening, because we can tell you that with rosacea, a lot of times it actually gets diagnosed as acne.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So it's actually, and because rosacea has different types, it can be very confusing. And so that's why it's like much better to just get it officially assessed.
Yeah. And even if you just have sensitive skin, we've had people that sign up for our hatchery. And one of the questions we ask is, do you have ingredient sensitivity? If so, what are you sensitive to? And sometimes the answer will be so random and so specific. Like someone wrote, I think a while ago, like cetyl alcohol, which is a very standard generic, like fatty alcohol. I'm like, how did you even narrow it down to that? And this is where like getting an actual allergy patch test is super helpful rather than doing your own detective work at home.
Totally. So now we got that aside. Let's talk about building a routine.
All right. Again, one of the main symptoms and basically a vicious cycle of sensitive skin is barrier health. If your barrier health is compromised, and chances are it's more prone to getting more irritants penetrating and it becomes more inflamed and so on and so forth. So tackling your skin barrier function is definitely the key starting point here.
Yeah. And in order to do that, one of the first things to look at is actually your cleanser. Actually looking at cleanser pH here can be helpful compared to a lot of other skin scenarios, actually.
Yeah, I will say, I think it's become such a norm, the low pH cleanser. There are a lot of options to choose from, and definitely check out our cleanser episode and blog post for more. pH is just one of many factors. So if you're someone that is really irritated by cleansers, do the next step and find out what surfactants might work for you. But generally speaking, low pH of slightly acidic 5-ish is good for you here.
Yeah. And try not to reach for even lower. Sometimes that we can get carried away with things, and actually lower pH can cause irritation. So there's actually been a lot of studies done on soap, you know, so this would be a skin scenario where we would say avoid the soap-based cleansers. A lot of comparisons done with soap and Sindet bars, which do have that lower pH of 5 to 6. So yeah. And the other thing that I thought was fascinating was when we were doing this research, a lot of times they did actually talk about humectants, emollients, and occlusives, which I thought was quite cool.
Yeah.
Check
our blog post.
Yeah. So one of the takeaways is not only do they mention that it's helpful to have a balance of these three, they do have a focus on occlusives, and which is something that Gordon and I tout a lot for compromised skin barriers. They actually, one thing that is noted is that occlusives are generally helpful, yes, but 100% petrolatum may actually not be the most ideal occlusive type, which I thought was fascinating. And this is actually specifically taken for a rosacea paper. I did want to mention. And I'm going to read this whole line that's taken from the paper. It's a little long, so bear with me, but they write, naturally anhydrous occlusive petrolatum jelly can reduce stratum corneum water loss by more than 98%. We went through this in our occlusive episode. Whereas other occlusive oils can create a 20 to 30% reduction of stratum corneum water loss. So they're talking about the reduction of tool, that water evaporation that can lead to irritation and dry skin. So the excellent occlusive properties of petrolatum may be due to its potential to diffuse into the intercellular lipid domain of the skin. However, the same ability to diffuse into the skin may also interfere with barrier recovery, and therefore may not be the best choice for those with an impaired stratum corneum permeability barrier associated skin disorder, such as, and they list ETR and PPR, which is actually two types of rosacea. So I thought this clip was actually really interesting, and while we are speaking to a very specific skin condition, it's something that is like sometimes we've had followers say like they don't actually, like basically that Vaseline isn't super successful for them. And so there is some merit to the idea of like blended occlusives. So these are your CeraVe, your Aquaphors, our Bon Voyage, things like that, have been generally more successful. And we should also mention that in multiple types of, multiple papers regarding sensitive skin or skin conditions, silicones have been recommended. So that's just something that I thought would be kind of interesting to share, because a lot of times people like, yes, Vaseline is usually the go-to. And then if that, let's start looking at blended, I think would be like how I would kind of take that.
Yeah. And this, I don't know if it's valid or not to say, but if you want something that if you're like, okay, petrolatum doesn't work for me, you can try a blended petrolatum based occlusive. A lot of scar gels on the market are basically just silicone gels.
Yeah.
That could be a light occlusive that just, it's a different type of product you try.
Point. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Yeah. All right. And one other thing that I thought was interesting, and this is also because I went down a rosacea rabbit hole, but so Gloria has to listen to this. There is a paper that talks about skin priming.
Oh, what does that mean?
In rosacea. And I actually think Gloria will find that we might really resonate with this. So the person writes, Del Rosso has discovered that in his clinical experience for patients with a flare of ETR and PPR, two types of rosacea, especially when associated with intensification of erythema and increased severity of symptoms, that first priming the skin with proper skincare before initiating topical therapy is very beneficial therapeutically. Skin priming essentially resets the SC permeability barrier to a more neutral playing field and involves initiating topical management over the first 3 to 5 days with only a specifically designated mild OTC cleanser and moisturizer. This approach corrects SC, stratum corneum impairment, that is related innately to rosacea, especially during a flare.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a great concept. Yeah. So skin barrier first, take care of it with some basic products.
Exactly.
Yep. That's, look at us.
So basically, we really like this because this is actually what everyone should do in a skin irritation scenario, is basically just cut down to the bare minimum, which is here they mentioned just your cleanser and moisturizer until you feel like skin has gone back to normal, and then go back to whatever treatments you're doing.
Actually, this is something we haven't mentioned, but if you guys have dabbled in our new website, you'll see that our products are kind of under a new organization scheme. And one of the categories we have is fundamentals. And underneath, we only have blank slate cleanser, Aquafix, Mr. Reliable moisturizer, and the oil. And basically, it's just those two functions. It's to cover your cleansing and your moisturizing, and take care of that as the fundamentals first. And then we can talk treatments and other in a pinch type products.
And y'all thought we were so whimsy.
We're so logical. There's so much logic, guys.
Yeah. So I really like that. And I just felt, I was like, validation. All right. So that pretty much covers the, building routine, what you should do in times of, when your skin's in a pinch and irritation, how to handle cleansers and moisturizers. Let's talk about actually searching for solutions. So first things would be looking for anti-redness product.
Okay, so this is going to be a Deco episode part 2.
I didn't mean it. It's just very quick.
Yeah, so this is where claims really matter. I guess we are adding to our when to decode, when not to decode list. Anti-redness is one of those situations and types of products where getting too nitty gritty with the actives list is not going to help your decision making. So let's take a look at one product, SkinCeuticals Phytocorrective Essence Mist. They did a 4-week clinical study with 50 people between the ages of 18 to 65 with mild to moderate visible redness, rough skin texture, dullness, and fine lines. Phytocorrective Essence Mist was applied to the face once a day. Just once a day is actually kind of interesting and kind of impressive. In conjunction with a sunscreen. So my face just feels so dry reading that. And reapply throughout the day as needed. Efficacy and tolerability evaluations were conducted at baseline 2 and week 2 and 4.
And so for their results, This clinical, they found that they saw a 31% reduction in visible redness immediately after use. And while that stat doesn't sound very impressive, we want to mention again that this is a clinical with actual measurements taken, not a consumer perception. And why the protocol is so important here is because it gives a very clear picture of what type of skin type was tested and how it's used. And we would say this is kind of a really good example of like, okay, I feel like this can help my redness. Yeah.
And I will say 31% doesn't sound like a lot, but I will say this is probably already a visible reduction of redness. Usually when we see clinical instrumental measurements in the teens is where I'm like, you may or may not perceive it as an improvement.
I think that's a really good point to highlight. And as a foil scenario to this, remember how I mentioned how if you looked for anti-redness products and if you Googled it in Sephora or Ulta's like search bar, it can come up with some very interesting product suggestions. One of them is the IS Clinical Active Serum that might also get promoted. But if you actually go through their, I believe this is a clinical that they did, it actually doesn't cater to redness at all. They actually, I'll just blitz through their clinical claims. It's 65% reduction in the appearance of fine lines and wrinkles, 94% reduction in the appearance of blemishes, 57% reduction in uneven complexion, but it doesn't say anything about redness. So I just want to put that out there so that when you guys are looking, you know this is why you should check the claim.
Yeah, redness is a very hard claim to hit. So yeah, definitely do a double take and look closer at clinical claims.
Yeah. All right. And finally, looking for soothing serums.
Okay, so as we mentioned in the beginning of the segment, this is limited, right? It's helpful for a lot of scenarios, but if your skin is in that very irritated, or if there's an actual condition like eczema or rosacea, this is where it can be a little limiting of what it can do for you.
Yeah, we definitely want to say there's a case for using soothing serums in your daily routine, whether you're sensitive skin or not. This is because your skin is constantly facing these external aggressors daily. And when you just want to be able to do what you can to keep skin happy and not end up in irritation town, basically. And this is where your botanicals, some of the favorites that we talk about, like Bisabolol, madecassoside, these all can be really a great add-on to your routine. But yeah, other than that, one last thing about sunscreens is, yes, minerals will probably be the safest bet to dabble in. Just know that you are getting, there is a trade-off with texture and probably aesthetics. And so, but if sunscreens are important to your routine, so we would say that would be the area we point you down.
And last but not least, we've said this a few times, but definitely remember that your friend's trigger is not your trigger. No lists are basically only loosely helpful. Everyone's trigger is incredibly different. You might have sensitive skin, but your skin is a-okay with all sorts of fragrance, but hates a really random vanilla ingredient. That's the nature of things. You can try to do your own detective work when that gets too cumbersome, too convoluted. Keep track of what you reacted to and bring it to your derm for a patch test to narrow it down.
Speaking of patch tests, Gloria, how do we patch test?
That is a great question, Victoria, because I think a lot of times, like, we've said it on the blog, in our book, and also on the podcast many times, which is, chemist rule, always patch test. And people are like, how do I patch test? Great question. First things first, always only try one new product at a time. If you're nuking your routine or you're adding 5 serums at a time, you really wouldn't know where the irritation is coming from. So we will say apply to a more trigger happy spot. You probably already know what yours are. For a lot of people, generally speaking, if you are really afraid of a flare up and you don't want to go out with like a really red skin on your cheek, I would say like kind of like that under chin, like right along your jawline is a pretty sensitive spot that will give you a good indication. I get very itchy here in general, so I will always know. So you put on your face, just leave it. I would say generally speaking, you don't have to go crazy with like trying to occlude it to see if it causes irritation. Just use it as you would normally and leave it on for the day.
Nothing else. Nothing else.
Yeah, and look for anything. Tingling, itchy, redness, or any sensation. I think for everyone who may experience skin sensitivity, your trigger is different or your symptoms are different. I get itchy. That is my sign. I may or may not get red. Redness is sometimes like stage 2 of irritation, but itchiness is usually where it starts. So look for your trigger.